I'll just say a few words about the cluster and then introduce our guests. The CTP cluster centers around the transformation of knowledge through our acknowledgement of and engagement with bodies, the sensorium, the arts. We assume the cultural, the artistic, and the theoretical to be inextricable from the political, and interventions in these arenas offer ways to shift power relations. Our faculty advisor, Dr. Dorinne Kondo, previously organized a conference panel of scholar artists who offered incisive theoretical analysis and moving performances of drama, dance, visual art, music, and spoken word. A conference participant told her, "You changed the air. We therefore seek to change the air of the academy, to push for scholarship to acknowledge, theorize, and celebrate embodiment, emotion, affect, mutual vulnerability, and susceptibility. We place scholar artists at the center of this transformative possibility and welcome critical cultural studies scholars, artists, activists, and others to join us in pushing conventional boundaries and changing the air." And then I will introduce Dr. Kondo, who is a professor of American Studies and Anthropology and former director of Asian American Studies here at USC. A cultural anthropologist, Dr. Kondo's award-winning books include Crafting Selves, Power, Gender, and Discourses of Identity in a Japanese Workplace, and About Face, Performing Race in Fashion and Theater. Her latest book, World Making, Race, Performance, and the Work of Creativity, based on 20 years of participation in theater as a dramaturg, scholar, and playwright, bends genre and blurs the borders between the personal, creative, and theoretical. Dr. Kondo has served as a dramaturg for the world premieres of 3 of Anna Deavere Smith's plays, and her own plays include Disgraceful Conduct, A Can He Dance, and Seamless. Elaine Hsieh Chou is an acclaimed Taiwanese American author and screenwriter from California. Her debut novel, Disorientation, was a New York Times Editor's Choice book, NYPL Young Lions finalist, and Thurber Prize for American Humor Finalist. A former Rona Jaffe graduate fellow at NYU, Chow's Pushcart Award-winning short fiction appears in Guernica, Tin House Online, and The Atlantic, and elsewhere, while her essays appear in The Cut and Vanity Fair. Chou is a 2023 Sundance Episodic Lab Fellow. Her selected pilot, Get Home Safe, is an hour-long social thriller. Her half-hour pilot, adapted from her short story, Banana Tree Ghost, was optioned by Legendary Entertainment following a 3-way bidding war. She was also named the 2024 Series Creator to Watch by Gotham. Her latest work, a multi-genre short story collection, Where Are You Really From?, was released by Penguin on August 19th of this year. From a mail-order bride express shipped in a cardboard box to an Asian American au pair confronted by her cooler and more stylish French doppelganger, Where Are You Really From? Offers kaleidoscopic views of a world both frightening and familiar, or perhaps frightening because so familiar. Chow's stories refuse easy moralizing, instead roaming freely to explore the broad range of what Xian Nai termed ugly feelings. While sensitive to the race, class, and gender dimensions of the paranoia, envy, and alienation her characters experience, Chou refuses to render them mere victims. She is more interested in how the villain and the victim coexist inside each of us and where they really come from. One of her narrators, in the midst of a doomed romance, states, "I can't help but laugh at the two of us, at this absolute repulsion to be seen by the other that lives alongside this desperate desire to be seen." In meditating on this contradiction with humor, genuine empathy, and startling insight, Chou offers readers new perspectives on our bodies and their messy interiors. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kondo to talk a little bit about our co-sponsors and then get the show going.
Yes.
Yeah.
That
Great.
was
Thank you so
beautiful.
much. Thank you, Zavi. Beautiful.
I want to frame that, like how you describe the book.
Yeah,
and, like,
beautiful.
I gotta
Truly.
send that to my publicist. Like, put this in the, in
Absolutely.
the online.
Absolutely.
Thank
So welcome, everyone. So delighted to see all of you. I just want to say a few words about the Consortium for Gender, Sexuality, Race, and Public Culture that brings together faculty and researchers from across USC, Southern California, and beyond to explore and contextualize shifts of representation of gender, race, sexuality in public culture while translating that research to the public sphere. The consortium sponsors an in-house podcast series. I have one called, at the moment, The Arts of Racial Reckoning. which was begun just after George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. I'm going to be initiating or kind of extending that into something called The Art of Vulnerability, the title of my next book, on sexual and racial violence, disability, and Asian American arts and performance. And this event will be part of the larger podcast. We're streaming on Instagram Live, and it'll be on the YouTube channel for the consortium. We also thank ACE Commons, the lecture series sponsored by the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity. And we're very grateful to have their sponsorship for our research cluster. Zavi gave a beautiful introduction. I'm trying not to fangirl too much because I came across Elaine. I need to preface this by saying that I was a product of East Asian studies at, let's call it, Ivy University, and came across Elaine's incredible novel Disorientation, which is in a way a satire, in a way a sort of, whodunit detective, caper, but it's also incredibly mordantly funny, but also an incredibly trenchant critique of race, gender, sexuality, and the reproduction of Orientalism in the academy and beyond. So I was at Ivy where I was the only woman of color, but so, in any setting in which I found myself. So it was a difficult time, let me say. And Elaine's book, as well as an article that I urge everyone to read, that I assigned to all my classes along with Elaine's work, is called In the Cut, called What White Men Say in Our Absence. I think is so, so, so important to understand the ways in which, I would say BIPOC women, but I think Asian women in particular, there's a particular racialized inflection of that violence. I think based on the conflation of the human and the object, the robotic, and also on the notion that, well, therefore you can do anything to them, really, and the kind of grisly violence and atrocities, frankly, that are perpetrated not simply in fiction, but in everyday life, I think are truly, it's like I couldn't look away. It was like someone was like stabbing me, but you can't.
I'm so sorry.
Can't ignore. No, but it's not you. It's like in the world. That's why I think like the work is so important, and it gets transmuted in all these incredibly witty and like intelligent, compelling ways in your work. And so I hope we could start with just your comments on all of this. And we are both Francophiles also.
Ex-Francophile, maybe. France disillusioned me.
But, various experiences of sexism, racism, misogyny, different decades. And yet there's a theme and a thread that connects. So I wonder if you could speak to that and how you worked with and through that in this particular collection, which I find so, it's in a different register a little bit than Disorientation, insofar as there's an exploration of a kind of surreal real. So you're sort of reading along and then there's something odd or creepy or about this, and explores realms such as VR, representation in cinema, and so on, and with different perspectives, as I think Zavi so beautifully noted, that it's not simply demonization. I know there's a lot there because there's so much I want to talk about. But if feel free to start anywhere in that.
Oh, okay.
So
I blacked out a little bit. So
yeah,
I was
no,
thinking
I'm
about
like
France
so.
for a second. So talking through like how the surreal and the real interplay, was that the
That's
or
part of it, and then
yeah.
racism and
Mm,
sexism. So
yes.
yeah.
Oh gosh. I guess like it's just, they say writers have a few obsessions in
Mhm.
their lives, and no matter how many different kinds of books they write, they'll just sort of tend to write about the same thing over and over. So I think I've realized by now, I'm like, okay, one of my fixations is, yeah, being othered, but how it intersects with being fetishized and hypersexualized. Because it's a very specific kind of othering, and I am fascinated and disgusted by how there is this line between hating someone so deeply and still being sexually attracted to them, and that's just something that I'm like, we need to talk about. um yeah, because it exists, I think, in intimate relationships. Like some people specifically look for race play. You'll see it on like dating apps. Like it is always sort of terrifying to me when I see it's like a white, straight man specifically wants like, oh, looking for a black woman to do race play. I'm like, oh God, like why? What are you gonna do to her? But then it's like, am I robbing women of their agency and their specific desires if I judge a woman who, for example, answers that
Mhm.
ad,
Mhm.
right? But anyway, so I think, yeah, that the way those things interact is an obsession that sort of bleeds through a lot of my writing. Um, yeah, and the surreal, I think, like, there's a little bit of it in Disorientation. I think I wanted to put these pills called Lucidax. They're like over-the-counter pills, but they sort of, make things feel unreal and you can hallucinate on them. So that was a nice way to introduce some surrealism into an otherwise, it's rooted in reality, even though absurd things are happening. But I like that in short stories, it felt like I had a little bit more freedom
Mhm.
to play with, yeah, surreality. And I think it just opens up a lot of doors that for writers, you don't want to feel caged in. So it's delightful to be able to, for example, yeah, just have a doppelganger exist. And hopefully, the hope is that it comes off as real, that when you're reading it, you're like, yeah, she met her real doppelganger in Paris.
Absolutely. And then, as Avi mentioned, the story about uh, the mail order bride who's literally mailed,
Mm.
like in a package with like packing pieces in a diaper. You know what I mean? And the happy endings, the VR brothel, which was very chilling in
I was
many
angry
ways.
in that story. Yeah.
Yes,
I
yes, I
have
could tell.
a thing about sex pats. I have a
Yes,
vendetta
yes.
against them. I am trying to they need to be taken to task, I don't
Mhm.
know, more publicly than they are.
Mhm.
Passport bros, I think like they're called now.
Mhm. And yet, one of the things that's admirable and extraordinary is the way in which I feel you're able to inhabit the um, position of someone we might dismiss as perpetrator
Mm.
or, who's highly problematic. And I wonder if you could address that because many of these stories have that person. So who's the guy who orders the mail order bride or or the perpetrator who at least initially is just like some average white dude. Um, and in a way, the novella as
Yeah, oh
well,
yeah,
you could say,
definitely.
it's slightly problematic Asian bro,
Yeah.
and understanding his perspective as well.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think in Disorientation, I'm writing from a point of view that does feel more familiar and comfortable, which is like Ingrid is Taiwanese American, PhD student. I was formerly a PhD student and I dropped out. Um, so I think because I had written that novel and I wrote some of these stories when I was still
uh-huh.
writing Disorientation, I think I did feel, for whatever reason, compelled to not duplicate that, right? Not sort of repeat what I felt I was excavating in the novel. So with, for example, Mail Order Love, I didn't outline in that story, which is sort of rare for me, and I let it unfold. And I think I could see very clearly a version of the story where Frank, he's much older. I mean, I think he's 3 times older than
Mm.
Bunny, the wife that he orders. Um, yeah, I could see a version in which he's abusive and creepy towards her, and that version is very real, I think, in these types of, like, 90-day fiancé relationships. And I just wasn't compelled by it. I was like, I could see how this plays out. I don't see myself surprising myself, which you wanna chase that feeling. So I was like, I'm just gonna see what happens, and it slowly unfolded in a way where Frank became more human to me, and eventually I didn't even realize this. It just sort of, the characters told me, like, oh, they're both grieving, and they're grieving in ways that I think grief commonly shows up, which is at an angle, right? Like it manifests in ways you don't understand, like, why is it manifesting this way? Yeah, and in the novella, David sort of subscribes to this popular idea of, like, oh, Asian women who date white men are, quote, white worshipping whores. There's like nicknames for them, a Lu, like, oh, she's such a Lu, Lu, and it's based on this like Asian American activist, I think, who was doxxed by them. Yeah, so it's like a whole subculture. There's like a Reddit for it. But I was fascinated by, like, how do you get there? Because I think it's, you get there through pain. Like, you don't arrive at that without having experienced deep pain. And I want to understand that. And I think fiction allows the writer to understand, yeah, other people and themselves, and I always do want to challenge myself to write into discomfort. Because otherwise, why write, right? If you're just going to write very safely and be like, these are my opinions and they are correct, and I stand by. I mean, that's not interesting, right? So yeah, that's sort of where I think that impulse for these ugly characters come, or just real. They're people are flawed,
Absolutely.
so they're real flawed characters, I hope.
And there are ways in which, even for example, in the first story, where you feel so deeply for this young woman who doesn't feel attractive or just is out of place in her family and is sent to Taiwan and, meets a cousin who's beautiful and so on and so forth. And then they kind of band together for a bit and come up with these violent scenarios, right? And so it's the ugly feelings, or, psychoanalysis, like rage and aggression, right? They're always there for all of those. So, is there more you would like to say about the ways in which we, like the so-called victims, or whoever,
Oh yeah,
can
the
be
way, like,
thought of in a
how,
complicated way? Yeah.
yeah, how it's like you put it, like, the victim and the villain are kind of inside all of us. Yeah, I think when I was trying to tie the collection together, and you're tasked with writing, like, a short paragraph about what this book is about, it's terrifying because it's like, how do I coalesce so many different themes and feelings that I was having while writing. So I landed on, I think this book, and it sounds very boring, is about perspective. So originally in the
It is, actually.
epigraph,
Yeah.
there's a Susan Sontag. I guess I'll read it because
Yes.
I love this
Yes.
quote. Don't you think at the very center of the whole enterprise of storytelling is the fact that storytelling is an activity that faces in two directions. On the one hand, it's connected with an idea of truth. On the other hand, it's connected with an idea of invention, imagination, lies. And I was like, oh, that hits on something that I have felt is really, uncanny about fiction, is that it is a lie, right? But it's a lie to access the truth. I think that's why we write fiction. That's why we read it, is we are trying to get at the truth. So it has to hold that, paradox inside itself. And I think people hold that inside themselves all the time. Like, I took a workshop with the great Alexander Chee, wonderful teacher and mentor and writer. And he said, point of view is the most important part of every story. And when he said that, I was like, I like wrote it down, like, this is important, right? Write down everything he says. But it took me a few years into like revising this where I was like, Alex was right. Of course he was, because how you write this story entirely depends on from what point you're telling it from in a character's life, and which character do you choose. And we carry, like, the truth just bends so easily. And I love that you can't ever really arrive at the truth because it's being refracted through every single character. So like I almost put, in a sort of very cheesy way, the definition of parallax, the scientific phenomenon of like depending on where you're standing, an object appears differently. But then I was like, I can't put like a Webster definition. Like it's too much. I don't know. So I took it out. But I think that idea persists throughout the collection.
Absolutely, and makes it rich and complicated in all kinds of fascinating ways. So thank you for that. I want us to get to the reading, but I just had one question about form. And as a playwright, as I'm trying to rebel against Aristotelian form. I mean, many people have done so, and before this, but your novella, am I allowed to say that? I don't want to give everything away, but anyway, your novella does do that. Can you talk a little bit about formal issues in that regard and what felt inadequate to you about
the
beginning, middle,
novella?
end?
It ended, I guess, in a more traditional way with, like, I should say, one ending. But I was not satisfied with it. I was like, something's wrong, something's missing. This is the whole point of the novella, is being lost if I end it that way, because I think what David, the narrator and protagonist, is trying to get at is that question of parallax, like what is the truth depending on where you stand, depending on where this character is standing versus like where I'm standing at this point in my life versus like a day later, So I initially, there was a section where he has to leave this writing residency he's at, and before he comes back, he imagines these scenarios, and then I later cut that, but finally I felt like I figured out the ending by essentially writing multiple endings. And there's a great Margaret Atwood short story called Happy Endings with an S, and it's like choose A or choose B or choose C, and it gives you sort of instructions. So I thought about that. I considered like, if you believe in this, or choose, and then I was like, I'm just gonna let the reader I gotta trust the reader to read this how they want to read it, if they choose one ending over another, versus if they believe all of them, versus if they're like, well, this dude is just hallucinating right now. I'm like, I leave it up to you. But I think there is something I like, sort of sometimes the tightness of a 3-act Aristotelian structure, but then I do like messing around with it, and in this case, it just sort of arrived on its own.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for the inspiration as I'm searching in my own work for ways to mess things up. I know there are many questions, and I'm going to let you ask one later, if that's okay, but about what felt most dangerous to you in writing.
Great.
I wonder if there were some passages you could share with us,
sure.
so we can savor the beauty of your writing.
I'll read, I think, I haven't read from this one before, but I feel it touches on some of the themes we talked about. So this is the one about the teenage girls, and it's called Carrot Legs. Does anyone know what those are? Like, if you're from Taiwan, or have you heard of Lo Bo Tui? It's like, yeah, it's like a phrase that I learned when I was living there, and I was like, oh, now I know this new thing that can be wrong with a woman's body.
In
It
Japan,
was,
it's called daikonashi, like daikon legs. You know, the thick and white.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, because loboto, I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, but carrots are like, sometimes like thin and orange, and it's like, no, 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 wait, white carrots. That's what my grandma would say. And I was like, oh, okay, so she's talking about like daikon. Okay. In America, I was not beautiful, but in Taiwan, I was ugly. I understood this before I even set foot in Taipei. On the way from the airport, I passed advertisements for skin whitening creams, double eyelid surgery, circle contact lenses. I hadn't been aware of all the variations of myself that lay dormant inside me, waiting to be enhanced. Growing up, wishing for naturally blue eyes or blonde hair was pointless, so I never did. But in Taipei, the standard for attainable beauty had shifted, and I alone was responsible for my ugliness. The summer I turned 13, my parents decided I was old enough to visit my grandparents by myself. They had arranged a welcome dinner at a noisy seafood restaurant with all my aunts, uncles, and cousins. They'd even rented a private dining room with dark paneled walls and ornate red carpet. I was seated next to my cousin, Lala. She was 16. I had first seen her standing alone outside the restaurant, checking her appearance in a compact mirror. She was pale and thin, with strawberry-tinted lips like the woman in the ads. When she wandered into our private room, I thought she'd come in by accident, a beautiful stranger who'd gotten lost. But then she was calling me May and clasping my shoulders while my grandparents scolded her for being late. I had wanted to hate her, but I loved her automatically as if she were an expensive gift. Lala will take care of you while you're here, Grandpa said. Biao Jie and Biao Mei, Grandma smiled, together at last. But have you ever seen cousins who look so unlike one another? Third aunt exclaimed. My family proceeded to catalog the breadth of our difference. How much wider Lala was than me, how her nose bridge was high and mine was flat, how she was so thin they could count the bones in her neck, how I was so fat I was stirring their appetite. Second uncle squeezed my arm. What are they feeding her in America? He crowed. Everyone laughed merrily, as though Lala and I weren't in the room. Lala leaned over to whisper in my ear, maybe we should kill them all. I felt so grateful I wanted to kiss her. That's the first one. Oh, thank
Beautiful.
you. I kind of
Love the rage.
wonder. I'm like debating. I'm like, because I often read from mail order love, but I kind of want to read from a different one. Maybe I'll read from the Paris story because we have talked a bit about France, and my friend Chloe is here today, who we met in Paris, and it's just amazing that life's connections can bring you together again. Okay, it's called "You Put a Rabbit on Me," which you probably know is like a phrase. Tu m'as posé un lapin? Oh, you're like, oh, that's there's so many in France. You need like a dictionary to
Yeah,
remember
really.
them. I moved to Paris to find myself. I didn't openly admit this, of course. To anyone who asked, I said I love children, especially children with accents, which is why I had applied to be an au pair. And while I had nothing against children, accented or otherwise, I had primarily come to Paris to find the real me, to discover who she wanted to be, who she could be. The American Elaine was old news, a soggy newspaper discarded in the rain. She had given America an honest chance, and it hadn't worked out. It wasn't anybody's fault. They simply were not compatible. The relationship had been awfully one-sided, with America taking the lead and she unable to say no thank you. And then one day she woke up bewildered at how she'd ended up where she'd ended up. Without ever seeming to have made active decisions leading towards the definitive facts of her life, she had a job she hated in a city she hated, surrounded by people she hated. She certainly had no joie de vivre. During the 10-hour flight, I thought of all the ways I would open myself up to radical change. I made a list. Dare to make yourself uncomfortable. Say yes to everything. Ask yourself, what would the French Elaine do in this situation? Okay, I'll end there.
Oh, beautiful.
Thank
And the
you.
story goes on from there to show what the French Elaine would do, right?
She does find herself,
she
just not
does.
how she expects. It's in the Monoprix, in the yogurt aisle. Magical things happen in the yogurt aisle. It's enormous.
Absolutely.
Like in America, it's just
It's
like a
true.
nice
One
little,
of
and in
these.
France, it just stretches
Yeah,
on.
it's so true. Yeah, great. We could open it up for questions, or is there another that you'd like to gesture
Oh,
toward?
no, I'm
No?
happy
Okay,
to
alrighty.
start.
Yeah, I know.
Discuss
So
it.
questions, I know you had a good one, but if any other people had issues that are raised by this wonderful work?
We can start with
Yeah.
yours.
I'm happy to start. My name is Sarah. Yeah, but I was just wondering when I was kind of reading up on this project and all of that, if there was a particular story that you felt in this collection was the most challenging or emotionally risky to write, and why did it feel that way?
I would say that there were maybe two, and I think they felt harder because I was inhabiting POVs that I just hadn't typically inhabited before. So in featured background, that's where the father reunites with his daughter in these very unusual circumstances. Athena, his daughter, is like a young, kind of hip, very politically active Asian American writer director. And so I feel like typically I would write from her POV and be like, yeah, I get that POV. I see her, I understand her. But again, I just wasn't compelled. I was like, I don't know, that doesn't seem interesting to me because again, I could see the beats play out, which you never want to feel. And I was like, but Gene is tricky, her father, and because he's very closed off, and the story unfolds in a way where he's withholding a lot from you, the audience. And until we meet Athena and she opens her mouth, you're like, oh, I think this story, he loses control of it in a bit. And I think they're both flawed, and they're both, I would say Athena is annoying. So it's like she's not perfect either, but that was hard to write, I think, from that point of view. But I think it was very eye-opening to write from the person, who's being the person who gets the no contact, who gets the block, which is, I think, a much more common thing that we're seeing in society is that it's okay. It's now socially acceptable to quote unquote protect your peace, define your boundaries, and go no contact with family members. Where I think in the past it was just like they're your family. They could vote directly in, against you and make your life worse through what they're voting for, putting their money towards, but you have to just see them at Thanksgiving, and so I think it's a good thing maybe that we've shifted towards this new understanding. And then David, who, like I mentioned, subscribes to these MR Asian politics. He's hard to, because I got like harassed a little bit by them when I used to be on Twitter, and they were mean, and I was like, and so it's very easy to I think regard them with cruelty too, to take that energy and give it back. But I was like, I don't think that's solving anything. Like when Facebook was active and I used to be in these like Asian American Facebook groups. And sometimes I'd get into arguments with people who were like, do you remember the Akai Gurley, Peter Liang controversy where Peter Liang was an NYPD cop who killed Akai Gurley, who was a Black man, and Peter, unusually for that time and even now, actually got, I think, fired or reprimanded. Something happened, whereas, as you know, typically white cops, they just get off scot-free and they're just like back patrolling, the next day. And so there was a lot of tension in the community and a lot of like, why did Peter get, consequences, but like, why weren't we being treated as white? And a lot of Asian Americans were like, we were never white, and we should not have presumed that being a good model minority gives you the status of white privilege. It doesn't. But being a quiet, good model minority serves white supremacy until it doesn't, and suddenly if there's a war with an Asian country, down you go first. You're now the enemy, you're the spy, and that's already we've felt that in recent years. Anyways, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so I would argue with these people who just didn't disagree with me, and I would be like, moderator, ban this person for their anti-Black, speech, and you need to go do self-crit in a corner, like type of thing. But then I had to later on realize, like, Elaine, when you ban them from these spaces and when you're not including them in the conversation, you can now push them into spaces where they may be welcomed by, let's say, more conservative right-wing groups who are like, yeah, man, we understand you. Come sit with us, And I realized, like, oh, there is something that can be lost that we've seen in current politics when you isolate people and you shun them. And so I think through writing, like, I don't want to shun someone like David. I want us to talk to each other. Yeah. Thank you. That was a long answer to that.
No, that was a great.
Yeah.
Sure.
Of course, yeah.
I just kind of also wanted to know, like, why do you think that releasing this collection is important right now? Like, why right now?
Ooh, well, it was a 2-book deal bought in 2020. So when it was bought, back then, the collection was quite different, I would say, because it was my NYU senior thesis for my MFA program. And there were more, I would say, hard satirical stories. There was a lot more flash fiction. The novella didn't exist. 2 or 3 of the stories didn't exist. At that point, it was, I think, different in a more sort of like wacky, in your face way. But, your writing changes because you're changing constantly. And that's what makes writing for a long period of time, like, difficult, right? And I think now that the collection has come out, I'm glad it percolated. Like, I think I needed to change, and I think I needed to write the stories that I did, and the ones that persisted were the ones that were more emotional and psychological. Because ultimately, yeah, you can have like a fun flash fiction that's like, oh, what a cool concept, but you'll probably forget it the second you close the book. And what I am trying to find as a reader is I want to be moved ultimately, right? So I think those are the stories that persisted. And some people have told me, like, oh, it's like quite timely, like what's going on with immigration and like the mail order love story. And I'm like, I wrote that in 2018 or 2019. Like, America just sucks. I mean, it always has. Have you heard of the Chinese Exclusion Act? Like, they're
Hello.
going to do it to us any day. Like, so I guess that's the thing, is things you don't expect to be timely. It just shows that history is constantly repeating itself. Bigotry is limited and simple-minded. They really don't have a lot to go off of, so they're just going to regurgitate same things for eternity. But yeah, I hope that it feels urgent in the way that, I don't know, writing that I guess comes from like a vulnerable place always maybe feels urgent. Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Hi, Elaine. Thank you for your insight and for your generosity. I am a Taiwanese American PhD student here, and I'm in creative writing, so you can imagine how cathartic it was to read Disorientation.
Wow.
And yeah, no, I wanted to ask a question about institutional life and how you've interacted with it. So obviously, disorientation comes from a place of like fraughtness within the academy, but also deep knowing. So I guess as a writer working within institutions and also within the framework of publishing, like, how have you find that interacting with your creative life and the stories that you want to tell? Has there been any friction, or do you feel like your journey has taught you something new?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question, and it's a big one. Okay, where to begin? I'm gonna lean on my good friend and brilliant writer Larissa Pham. If you guys know her work, and her novel Discipline comes out in January. It's incredible. So she describes drafting, like when you're writing, right? When you're in the pure creative womb, you are a pig frolicking in the mud. You are free, you are happy, you don't have a care in the world except to frolic and eat slop. But then when you're published, you're made into prosciutto or bacon or sausage, what have you. You're now to be consumed. And after being made into, let's just say, a sausage, can you revert back to your pig self? I think this is a conversation I like having with writers, in that you can't know 100% if you have not been, it's kind of a intense word to use, but infected by your experience of being published, which is that you likely will have encountered criticism. You will know how much did you sell roughly. You will know, did I get this nomination or prize or not, right? So all of that information, I think, even if you try to keep it away from the pig self that's still deep down inside you, you've now experienced what it's like to be a sausage. So I think you may never go back to the pig state. And I think that's what's really terrifying. And I've heard me and Larissa have talked about, like, oh, maybe the way you go back to the pig is to pivot, to be like, I'm writing a book of essays next, because I don't know what it's like to be a nonfiction sausage or a poetry sausage, right? And so you can get around the fear of contamination. So I think that's something that I don't know if it's controversial to say. Some people say, like, oh, a writer's first, like a lot of authors' first novel was their best work. And sometimes I wonder, is it because of the whole pig sausage thing? Is that they can't help but having that contempt? Because when people are in the room with you when you write, your writing suffers. And before you've ever been published, no one's in the room with you, and there's a freedom to knowing you may never be published, and someone would never read this, right? But once you've been published, you kind of have a high chance of being read again. So that's always there. In terms of institutions, I think, I guess that's a whole other question. You certainly have, I think, a lot of experience with the institute. I did my MFA program, and I was in a PhD program in France, which is like very different from American academia. But I think likewise, there's just a lot of inner politics, and it's very stifling and very inward. And I felt in academia that sometimes we talk about the real world, but we were so divorced from the real world, and it feels like you're just floating away on this little planet where you speak the same language as like 10 other Martians. And that's kind of your life. If you stay in academia, you're with the 10 Martians on that planet.
Talking about Derrida.
Oh God, yeah. I was like trying to prove so much to myself in undergrad. I wrote my undergrad honors thesis on Derrida. Deeply embarrassing to admit now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Because you mentioned France so many times.
Let's talk about France.
I wanted to ask you, how much do you think you're writing on race, and as you say, your obsession with writing on race in a certain way, how much do you think it's informed by your transnational experiences of racialization, of like the kind of like differential racialization in France versus in the US, but also like what is similar, and just kind of your experience.
Oh yeah, living in France changed like everything for me, because I had grown up in Orange County and then partly in the Bay Area. And when I was growing up, like in elementary school, and I guess going on into middle school, I'd have like friends that would be mean to me. I mean, I think this is pretty common. Like your friends are the ones that are often the cruelest to you and would make jokes about me being Asian or my eyes or whatever, right? And so I had that experience, but because it was through the lens of like, oh, we're all friends, you know, it maybe didn't feel as violent, though in retrospect, it is still really sad that your friends are the ones making you feel so like insecure about yourself. But I hadn't faced, I would say, outright harassment until I moved to France. And it is so pervasive. It's in not only like everyday conversations, like I would get I would get verbally harassed, I would term it that way, in like buses, at the supermarket, like the checkout line, at the post office one time, and I was followed several times by men. So I'm sure you can speak to this. There's like, for whatever reason, this image of an Asian woman in France as she can only be a sex worker. If I see an Asian woman and she's standing on a street, she is a sex worker. And that is like wild that there is so little representation. It doesn't even like representation as a word doesn't even cover it well enough, but it's like that's how dire it is that you can't see an Asian woman without thinking she serves one purpose. And several of my Asian femme friends, would get asked like how much on the street. And and I was so scared because I was like, why are they following? Like I couldn't put two and two together for a long time. And I faced really dehumanizing, cruel harassment where I just felt so I had never experienced anything like it. Like this one, I'm still haunted by this one man who out of nowhere harassed me in front of a Chinese restaurant. He was eating at Happy Noodles. He was eating my food and still had the gall to just be so racist and cruel. And so after living in France, it was shocking. It was eye-opening. And I was like, I have been in a relative kind of bubble. And I think until you experience it over and over, too, is the thing. Because I was there for 7 years. It's a long time to feel unsafe. Like when and I think I developed a paranoia about going outside because I was always like, it's going to come out of nowhere. Like I never knew when it was going to come. And that's a terrible way to live. So I did have to leave France because I was like, I can't live this way. And people there, they don't know what an Asian American is. They've never heard of us. They're just like, but you're Chinese. Like, shut up. Like, so, like that. Like, why are you telling me you're American? You know, like they just have. I don't know. They have a complicated relationship to a French Asian. So a French, born and raised in France, Asian is like, I'm French. They're like, no, 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 no. Like, yeah, where are you really from? So, I think I needed to go through it. I think it made me write about race much more critically. And maybe I think sometimes they're like, oh, you're exaggerating. Are people really like this? But it's like once you live through it, it's like, yeah, they are. And if you're from kind of like a blue state in America, it's easy to forget what it actually can be like. Yeah.
Even if you're in a blue state that doesn't have many Asian Americans.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
New Haven for
Oh
me.
gosh. Oh yeah.
Three in
Never
20
mind.
minutes. 3 racial epithets
In 20.
You know, so, you know, hey. We're still here.
Yeah,
Anyway.
very true.
I have these are all such amazing questions, by the way.
Yeah.
This is super great
Yes,
nice
thank you.
answers. I have more of a craft question that I was curious about. You know, I think like a short story collection in yours especially has like a flow, and I was wondering it's like how you chose to order stuff in certain ways. It's like was there a lot of conversation about like what goes from there?
Oh, it was a little tricky, and I didn't have much guidance. So I was like, okay, let me try to start with the most obvious placements, which is like the novella should go at the end. It's long, right? So that goes there. Okay, no, well, let me start at the beginning then. And Carrot Legs was the first story I wrote after I quit my PhD program in 2015, 2016, and it started out very like sort of a just feelings piece. Like I had recently gone to Taiwan and I was just kind of writing about Taiwan and this dumpling shop that I used to go to a lot. And because I lived there for a year after graduating from undergrad. And it just kept expanding. But I think because it was sort of my return to fiction, because while I was pursuing academia and like teaching ESL, I didn't write fiction for I think almost 7 years because I wrote it in undergrad, taking creative writing classes, and I loved it so much. But it was like that's not a real job. Get serious now. So I guess I had that sort of special connection to it, and I was like, I think this should be first. And I think the voice is different from a lot of the other stories because it's been 10 years now, which is wild to think about. And then once I had the first one and the last one, it was more like, okay, what stories are a little bit in conversation with each other so you're not too shocked by the change, like tonally, or it could be thematically. Like Bunny is from Taiwan, so there's like a link to the second story. And then I remember like Happy Endings is a tricky one because that's the most violent story. And I was like, can't put it in the first half. I think it'll scare people off maybe or something. So I was like, okay, towards the back end, but it's got to be cushioned a little bit by stories that I think have more hope. So that's sort of how I ended up with the order. Yeah. Yeah. So it was like a little, mixing around. Yeah.
I have a question.
Steve, hello.
I have a question about your process. I'm thinking about two things you said. One was that in this collection, you cut some of the earlier, more satirical pieces
Yeah.
from your thesis. And the second thought was how you mentioned earlier that, like, in your story, if you're not surprised by your story, it's not compelling.
Mm.
And with hard satire, often that is just like, this is my opinion.
Yeah.
Right? So I was wondering if you had if that sort of shift into this other mode of writing toward the unknown or writing toward mystery is something that developed as you were thinking about publication, as you were thinking about the market, or is that something that developed just because you were growing, like as a person, or?
Mm. I would like to think it's the latter. I would like to think I've left the sausage mode factory, but I think part of it is like I wrote a lot of the stories during my time at NYU. So I was writing the novel and the stories at the same time because I had this plan to finish the novel, but I workshopped it once and it just didn't work for me. I was like, I can't workshop something that I'm still actively working on. So I was like, I have to write this alone and not show it to anyone. But I had to submit to workshop. So the stories were like my playground. It was like Disorientation was so satirical and this very specific tone that I hadn't ever written in before, but I think the content demanded that tone. And so, yeah, I had this freedom to play. But I think a lot of the satirical stuff I was writing was shortly after coming back from France, and I was angry. I think until I wrote a lot of it out of my system, I didn't realize like, oh, I felt so powerless. I only had power on the page. And during my time in France, that's when I was more involved in activism and organizing, and I started to also feel really powerless in that space because, yeah, we would organize and we would go out and do our chants and like walk in a circle. And then after a while, when nothing changes, you do start, your heart gets a little more broken each time. I think it's a really painful thing to admit. And I think that's why lifelong activists are extremely rare because it is something that can break you down when you're just like, why am I doing this when I just see the same horrors being repeated? But so anyways, I think satire has historically been a way for like marginalized voices to wield power over people or situations that they have no power over in real life. So I think that's why I was writing in that register, and I had so much anger inside me. And I guess it ended up being therapeutic in that, like, I guess I haven't I don't know, I think this tendency still comes out in me, I never wanna say, like, "Oh, I'm not gonna write in it," that kind of voice again. Um, but I think to my surprise, I was like, "Oh, I guess I did have a lot to get out of me," and I feel somewhat relieved that it's out on the page now, or, in this book now. And it sort of frees you up as a writer.
Yeah. That's really interesting because that's something I've been thinking about
Yeah.
lately. Is like, what comes after anger? What's the mode after?
Mm.
Where do you go from there?
Yeah.
Especially when we're doing work that's a little bit like topical or political. Yeah, what's
Exactly.
the mode? What's the angle? How do you approach that? So, interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a great that I'm still thinking about, because this is a conversation David and Sophia have in the novella, where it's like Asian American writers, you're just like screwed either way. If you write explicitly about race, you can be accused of, like, oh, this is trauma porn. You're just trying to get those Oprah book club readers, white woman readers, who are like, I have so much empathy for for this, and therefore, yeah, I'll support your book. I don't know. So that, like, you can be kind of accused of that, of like exploiting your community's pain and history. But if you don't write about race at all, you're like, you're self-hating, you're not supporting community, you're invisibilizing us when we already have no representation, or very little representation. So in the novella, they're just like, you're, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I have not figured out a way out of this.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. And thank you for that. It's an inspiration. I too am trying to deal with these issues in my playwriting. So thank you for grappling with all of this and so beautifully.
Oh, I'm trying, but I don't know if it's.
I think we should wrap it up. And we thank all of you for coming. And we certainly thank our wonderful author and speaker, Elaine Hsieh Chou.
Thank you,
For your
Doreen. Thank you so
inspiration.
much. Thank
I'm
all
sorry
of
for the
you.
fangirling.
No, it was amazing. Thank you so much for being here today, and for all your thoughtful questions, and just like, hanging out when you could be anywhere else.
And books are for sale here, so please get a copy. I'm going to get one more for myself. So
Thank you,
thank you,
everyone. Thank you,
everyone.
Zong.